My husband's family stole my wedding gifts while we were on our honeymoon. One receipt changed everything. My husband always told me his family was a little overbearing, but he promised they would never cross a line that mattered. 3 days after our wedding, I learned that promise was worth absolutely nothing. When we came home from our honeymoon, nearly every wedding gift we'd received had vanished. Thousands of dollars in cash, brand new kitchen appliances, handmade keepsakes from relatives who had traveled across the country, even the quilt my late grandmother had spent months sewing before she passed away. His family smiled, shrugged, and insisted they had no idea what happened. They thought they had committed the perfect theft. They didn't know they had overlooked one tiny piece of paper that would eventually destroy every lie they told. My name is Ruby. I'm 32 years old, and until my wedding day, I believed I'd married the kindest man I had ever met. His name was Ethan. We had been together for 4 years before he proposed. We weren't wealthy. We both worked ordinary jobs, saved carefully, skipped expensive vacations, and spent years planning for a future we could actually afford. Our wedding wasn't extravagant, but it was beautiful. Almost 150 friends and relatives filled the small countryside venue we'd rented. There were flowers grown by my aunt, desserts baked by neighbors, and decorations made by friends who volunteered because they loved us. Everything felt genuine. I remember looking around during our first dance and thinking that this was exactly the life I'd always wanted. What I didn't notice was how often Ethan's mother stared at the gift table. Her name was Linda. Whenever guests placed wrapped boxes or envelopes onto the table, her eyes followed them. At first, I assumed she was simply making sure everything stayed organized. Looking back, I realized she was counting. She wasn't admiring our gifts. She was calculating their value. Linda had always been polite to my face, but something about her smile never reached her eyes. She liked asking questions that sounded innocent, but always carried another meaning. How much did your parents spend on the venue? Who paid for the honeymoon? Did your grandmother leave you anything valuable? At the time, I dismissed those questions as curiosity. Now I know they were something else entirely. Ethan's younger sister, Melissa, wasn't much different. She constantly joked that newlyweds received the best free shopping spree of their lives. Everyone laughed. I laughed too. I wish I hadn't. During the reception, guests filled the gift table faster than the staff could organize it. Beautiful cookware, small appliances, decorations for our first home, cash envelopes from older relatives who preferred traditional gifts. Several people even brought expensive electronics after checking our registry. My maid of honor teased me that we'd have enough kitchen gadgets to last 20 years. I believed her. Near the end of the evening, the venue manager asked where we wanted the gifts delivered after the reception. Before I could answer, Linda stepped forward. She insisted not to worry because Ethan's family would handle everything. She explained that the newlyweds should enjoy their honeymoon without stressing over heavy boxes. It sounded thoughtful. Even I thanked her. The venue staff seemed relieved. Several members of Ethan's family helped load everything after we left for the airport that night. I never questioned it. Why would I? They were family. Or at least, I thought they were. Our honeymoon lasted 7 days. 7 peaceful days where my phone stayed mostly silent. Linda sent cheerful messages every morning. Hope you're relaxing. Don't worry about anything at home. Everything is under control. Those messages comforted me. Now they make my stomach turn. On our flight home, Ethan talked excitedly about unpacking all the wedding gifts together. He wondered who had bought the espresso machine we'd registered for. I couldn't wait to read the handwritten cards. Some gifts weren't expensive, but they meant everything because they came from people who loved us. I imagined spending the evening opening boxes, laughing over funny notes, and writing thank you cards together. That memory never happened. Instead, the moment we unlocked the front door, I knew something was wrong. The living room was strangely empty. The corner where dozens of unopened wedding gifts were supposed to be stacked held only a handful of small boxes. I froze. At first, I convinced myself Ethan's family had moved everything into another room. I checked the dining room. Nothing. The guest room. Nothing. The garage. Nothing. Then I opened the storage closet. Empty. A cold feeling spread through my chest. "Ethan!" My voice barely came out. He walked through every room just as quickly as I had. The excitement disappeared from his face. Neither of us spoke for several seconds, because deep down, we already knew. Someone hadn't misplaced our wedding gifts. Someone had taken them, and whoever did it knew exactly when we'd be gone. The silence inside our house felt heavier than anything I had ever experienced. Neither Ethan nor I wanted to say the obvious out loud. Almost everything was gone. Only a few inexpensive gifts remained, as if someone had deliberately chosen what was worth taking and what wasn't. The expensive cookware had disappeared. The cash envelopes were gone. The electronics were gone. Even the handmade quilt from my grandmother was missing. That hurt more than anything else. She had spent nearly 6 months sewing it by hand while she was fighting cancer. Before she passed away, she told me she wanted me to wrap myself in it whenever life became difficult, because it would always remind me that I was loved. It wasn't just a blanket. It was the last gift I would ever receive from her, and now it was gone. I could feel tears forming, but I forced myself to stay calm. Panicking wasn't going to bring anything back. The first thing we did was call the wedding venue. The manager answered immediately. She sounded surprised when I explained what had happened. According to her, everything had gone exactly as planned. She remembered Ethan's mother personally supervising the gift collection after the reception. She even thanked Linda for making the cleanup so easy. That answer made my stomach tighten. The venue hadn't lost our gifts. They had handed them directly to Ethan's family. When I ended the call, Ethan immediately phoned his mother. I could only hear his side of the conversation. At first, he sounded relaxed, then confused. Finally, completely silent. After several minutes, he hung up. "What did she say?" I asked. He rubbed his forehead. "My mom says they dropped everything off here before we left for the airport." I looked around the nearly empty house. Obviously, they didn't. He nodded slowly. "I know." Less than an hour later, Linda arrived with Ethan's father and his younger sister Melissa. They walked into our home looking almost offended that we had called them. Linda immediately insisted there must have been a misunderstanding. According to her, every single gift had been unloaded exactly where it belonged. She suggested maybe someone had broken into the house while we were away. It sounded reasonable, for about 5 seconds. Then I remembered something. There were no signs of forced entry. The doors were still locked. The windows hadn't been touched. Nothing else inside the house had been stolen. Our television was still there. Our laptops were still sitting on the office desk. Jewelry I had left in the bedroom drawer hadn't moved. The only things missing were our wedding gifts. Whoever entered this house hadn't behaved like a burglar. They behaved like someone who knew exactly what they wanted. Melissa tried to laugh the situation off. She suggested maybe someone had targeted newlyweds because they knew wedding gifts were valuable. Again, it almost sounded believable. Almost. But one detail kept bothering me. Our neighbors had security cameras facing the street. If strangers had spent an hour carrying dozens of large boxes out of our house, someone would have noticed. I walked next door that same afternoon. Our elderly neighbor, Mr. Jenkins, welcomed me inside immediately. When I explained what had happened, he looked genuinely shocked. Then he said something that made my heart stop. He remembered seeing several vehicles outside our house the morning after the wedding. Not unfamiliar vehicles. He recognized Ethan's mother's SUV. He also remembered Melissa's car. According to him, they spent nearly 2 hours loading and unloading boxes. He assumed they were helping us move wedding gifts inside. Instead, from the camera footage, it looked like they were carrying boxes back out. Mr. Jenkins offered to show me the recording. The quality wasn't perfect. The camera couldn't capture faces clearly from that distance, but the vehicles were unmistakable. Linda's dark blue SUV, Melissa's silver crossover. The timestamp showed they arrived less than 12 hours after our wedding. Neither Ethan nor I had even reached our honeymoon destination yet. I watched the footage over and over. Large boxes were carried from our front door. Smaller gift bags followed. Then came appliance boxes that looked exactly like the ones we'd received at the reception. Trip after trip, load after load, nearly 90 minutes of moving gifts. No strangers, no burglars, just family. When we returned home with a copy of the footage, Ethan looked like someone whose entire world had cracked open. He still wasn't ready to accuse his family. He kept insisting there had to be another explanation. Maybe they had been moving everything somewhere safe. Maybe there was a storage unit. Maybe they planned to surprise us. I wanted to believe him. I truly did. But one question refused to leave my mind. If this had all been innocent, why hadn't anyone told us where our wedding gifts were? That night, neither of us slept. The security footage kept replaying in my mind. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Linda and Melissa carrying box after box out of our house, while Ethan and I were hundreds of miles away, celebrating the beginning of our marriage. I wanted to believe there had to be a logical explanation, but every explanation required one simple thing: honesty. And no one in Ethan's family was being honest. The next morning, Ethan suggested we visit his parents' house. He hoped seeing us in person would encourage them to tell the truth. I wasn't expecting a confession. I just wanted answers. When we arrived, Linda welcomed us with the same calm smile she always wore. She acted as though nothing unusual had happened. Melissa was sitting at the kitchen table drinking coffee. Neither of them looked nervous. That surprised me. If they had stolen thousands of dollars worth of gifts, they certainly didn't look worried about getting caught. Ethan calmly asked where our wedding presents were. Linda repeated the exact same story. She insisted every gift had been left inside our house before we left for the airport. When Ethan mentioned the neighbor's security footage, her smile disappeared for only a second. Then she recovered. She claimed the video simply showed them helping organize everything. Melissa immediately agreed. According to both of them, they had done us a favor, nothing more. Their stories sounded rehearsed, almost identical. Every answer came too quickly. Every detail matched perfectly. It felt less like a conversation and more like listening to people repeat lines they had practiced together. I walked around the house while they talked. Not because I expected to find our gifts. I simply needed a moment away from the tension. Then I noticed something strange. In the corner of the family room sat a brand new stand mixer. It looked exactly like the premium model my aunt and uncle had bought from our wedding registry. The same color, the same limited edition finish, the same decorative ribbon was still tied loosely around the handle. My heart skipped. I couldn't prove it was ours. Hundreds of people could own the same model. Still, something didn't feel right. Before leaving, I quietly took one last look at the appliance. A tiny scratch marked the front corner. I remembered that scratch. When my aunt sent me a photo before wrapping the gift, she apologized because the store had accidentally scratched the display model and offered a discount. She thought I wouldn't mind. She was right. I hadn't minded at all. Now that tiny scratch was sitting in Linda's living room. I said nothing. Not yet. As we drove home, I told Ethan what I'd noticed. He stared at the road in silence. Finally, he admitted he remembered the photo too. But he still wasn't ready to accuse his mother without undeniable proof. "I need facts," he said quietly. "So do I." That afternoon, I began making a complete list of every wedding gift we had received. Fortunately, our wedding registry still contained purchase records for many items. Friends also started sending us pictures they had taken during the reception. Most people hadn't realized it at the time, but the gift table appeared in dozens of photos. I enlarged every image. One by one, I identified the missing boxes: the expensive coffee machine, the cookware set, the television, the stand mixer. Everything had definitely been there. Then my maid of honor called. "I found something you might want." She had collected all the greeting cards guests left on the gift table before the reception ended. Most of the cards had already been opened, so we could organize thank you notes later. As she sorted through them, she realized one envelope still contained its purchase receipt. She apologized for forgetting to give it to us sooner. An hour later, she dropped off the stack of cards. At first, it seemed like nothing important, until one small white receipt slipped onto my kitchen floor. It belonged to the stand mixer. But that wasn't the surprising part. Across the bottom was something I had almost ignored: the appliance's serial number, a number unique to that exact machine. No two mixers shared it. I immediately grabbed my phone and compared it with the enlarged photo my aunt had sent before the wedding. The serial number was partially visible on the side of the box. It matched perfectly. For the first time since coming home, I finally had something real. Not a feeling, not a suspicion. Evidence. I didn't realize it yet, but that little receipt was about to unravel every lie Ethan's family had told us. I held that receipt in my hands for nearly 10 minutes. It looked so ordinary, a small piece of paper that most people would have thrown away without a second thought. But to me, it suddenly became the most valuable thing in our entire house. For the first time, I wasn't relying on assumptions. I had something that could actually be verified. The next morning, I called the appliance store where my aunt had purchased the stand mixer. I wasn't expecting much. After all, stores usually protect customer information. The employee who answered listened patiently as I explained that our wedding gifts had disappeared while we were on our honeymoon. At first, she apologized and said she couldn't discuss another customer's purchases. I completely understood. Then I asked a different question. I wasn't trying to identify a customer. I simply wanted to know whether the mixer with that specific serial number had ever been returned. She placed me on hold. Those 3 minutes felt like an hour. Finally, she came back. She couldn't tell me who made the return, but she confirmed something far more important. Yes, that exact mixer had been returned, only 4 days after our wedding. My heart started pounding. 4 days. Ethan and I had still been lying on a beach during our honeymoon. There was no way either of us could have returned it. The employee explained that the item had been exchanged for store credit instead of a cash refund. Again, she couldn't reveal who received the credit, but she accidentally mentioned one detail before ending the call. The replacement appliance had been picked up at another branch across town. That was enough. I thanked her and immediately called Ethan. Neither of us said much. We didn't need to. Someone had stolen one of our wedding gifts. Then they had exchanged it for something they actually wanted. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was planned. That afternoon, Ethan and I drove to the second store. We knew they probably wouldn't give us any personal information. Still, we hoped someone might remember the transaction. A manager agreed to speak with us after hearing the situation. He carefully examined the receipt and the serial number. Although company policy prevented him from identifying the customer, he did confirm that the exchange involved a different appliance. Not another mixer. A high-end dishwasher. A much more expensive model. The thief had even paid the price difference. That told us something important. Whoever exchanged the gift wasn't desperate for money. They were upgrading their own home. As we walked back to the parking lot, Ethan suddenly stopped. He looked sick. My mom mentioned last month that her dishwasher was getting old. Neither of us spoke after that, because we were both thinking exactly the same thing. The following evening, my phone buzzed with a notification from social media. Melissa had uploaded several new photos. Normally, I ignored her posts. This time, something caught my eye. She proudly shared pictures from what she called her family kitchen makeover. The first few photos showed fresh paint, new countertops, decorations. Then I reached the last image. There it was, a brand new stainless steel dishwasher. Exactly the same model the store manager had described. Maybe that alone wouldn't have meant anything. People renovate kitchens all the time. But Melissa had forgotten one small detail. The appliance was still covered with protective factory film. She had installed it only recently. I zoomed in. Then even closer. A white shipping label was still attached to the side. Most of the numbers were blurry, except one, the final 6 digits. They matched the pickup record the manager had allowed me to briefly compare before putting the paperwork away. Not the complete serial number, just enough to recognize it. Melissa had unknowingly photographed the evidence herself. I showed Ethan. His face turned pale. For several minutes, he simply stared at the picture. The excuses were disappearing one by one. The security footage, the missing gifts, the returned mixer, the exchanged appliance, now the brand new dishwasher. Each piece alone wasn't enough. Together, they painted one terrifying picture. His family hadn't borrowed our wedding gifts. They hadn't protected them. They had divided them up like property they believed belonged to them, and judging by Melissa's smiling photos, they never expected anyone to trace the gifts back to them. They were wrong, because the deeper I looked, the more I realized the stand mixer wasn't the only thing they had returned. Melissa's social media post changed everything. Until then, we had been collecting clues. Now we had a clear direction. If one wedding gift had been returned and exchanged, there was a good chance others had been treated the same way. I spent the next several days going through our wedding registry item by item. Fortunately, many of our guests had purchased gifts directly from major retailers. That meant every appliance had a serial number, every expensive item had a purchase record, and every record left a trail. I contacted several stores, always asking the same simple question: had the item with this serial number ever been returned? Most employees couldn't share customer information. I wasn't asking them to. I only needed a yes or no. The answers shocked me. The espresso machine had been returned. The premium cookware set had been exchanged. The robot vacuum had been refunded for store credit. Piece after piece disappeared exactly the same way. Every return happened within a week of our wedding. While Ethan and I were still enjoying our honeymoon, it was impossible to ignore. This wasn't one impulsive theft. Someone had organized everything. Someone had sorted the gifts. Someone had decided which items to keep, which ones to exchange, and which ones could be converted into store credit. It was planned with frightening precision. Even Ethan stopped searching for innocent explanations. One evening, he quietly admitted something that had been bothering him. His mother had insisted that he give her a spare key to our house several months before the wedding. She claimed it was only for emergencies. He never imagined she would actually use it. Now we finally understood why there had been no signs of forced entry. They never needed to break in. They already had permission. At least, they had once. The realization made Ethan physically ill. He kept apologizing, again and again. He blamed himself for trusting people who had raised him. I told him this wasn't his fault. The people who planned the theft were responsible. No one expects their own family to rob them, especially not during their honeymoon. A few days later, Ethan asked his parents to come to our house. This time there would be no accusations, only evidence. Linda arrived looking confident. Melissa followed, acting bored, as if the entire situation had become an inconvenience. Ethan placed several folders on the dining table. Inside were copies of every receipt, the serial numbers, the return confirmations, the timestamps, photos from our wedding, security camera screenshots, Melissa's own social media pictures. No one spoke for several seconds. Linda slowly opened the first folder, then another, then another. For the first time since this nightmare began, her confidence disappeared. Melissa looked at the papers before quickly looking away. Neither of them touched the final folder. Ethan asked one simple question. "If you didn't take our gifts, how did our wedding presents end up being returned while we were out of the country?" Silence. A long, uncomfortable silence. Then came the first lie. Linda claimed someone must have stolen the gifts from her after she picked them up. The story collapsed immediately. She couldn't explain why she had never reported the theft, or why she never told us. Then came the second lie. She suggested the stores must have made mistakes. But every return involved different employees, different dates, and different locations. The odds of all those records being wrong were practically impossible. Finally, Melissa lost her patience. She muttered something that neither Ethan nor I expected to hear. She said, "They thought we had more than enough." She complained that many young couples received expensive wedding gifts they didn't really need. She insisted families should help each other, especially when some relatives had less. I stared at her in disbelief. She wasn't apologizing. She was trying to justify stealing from us. Linda quickly interrupted, realizing Melissa had said too much, but it was already too late. For the first time, the truth had slipped through the cracks. They didn't believe they had stolen anything. They believed they were entitled to our wedding gifts simply because they were family. As shocking as that admission was, it wasn't the biggest mistake they made that day, because hidden inside one of those store records was a transaction neither of them remembered, and it was about to expose something far worse than stolen appliances. Melissa's careless comment stayed in my head for the rest of the night. She hadn't denied taking our wedding gifts. She had only argued that they deserved them. That single sentence changed how I looked at everything. This had never been about money. It was about entitlement. Linda and Melissa truly believed that because Ethan was their family, anything that belonged to him also belonged to them, including the life we were trying to build together. The following morning, I spread every receipt, every return record, and every photograph across our dining room table. I wanted to see the entire timeline: wedding day, gift collection, our flight, store returns, social media posts. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Then I noticed something strange. One return confirmation included a customer loyalty number. Most people wouldn't pay attention to it. It was just a string of numbers printed beneath the transaction. But I had seen it before. Months earlier, Linda had proudly shown me how much money she saved using her favorite store's rewards program. She even joked that she earned enough points every year to buy Christmas presents. I remembered because she had shown the rewards card on her phone. The last few digits were still stuck in my memory. I compared them. They matched. I checked again, then a third time. There was no mistake. The loyalty account used during the return belonged to Linda. My hands started shaking. This wasn't circumstantial anymore. She hadn't simply received stolen gifts. She had personally stood at the register while returning them. I immediately called the store. This time, I asked whether loyalty accounts automatically appeared during transactions. The manager explained that customers had to scan their own membership card or enter their phone number. It wasn't something employees guessed. The account owner had to provide it. That meant Linda herself had identified the transaction as her own. She had left a digital signature on stolen property. I looked at Ethan. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. His expression told me everything. The last piece of hope he had been holding on to disappeared. For several minutes, he simply sat in silence, staring at the receipt. Finally, he whispered something I never expected to hear. "I don't recognize my own family anymore." Neither did I, but the evidence still wasn't finished speaking. While organizing our thank you cards, I noticed that several guests had written exactly how much money they had given us. One elderly aunt had tucked a note inside her card. She apologized for not being able to afford a larger gift and mentioned that she had enclosed $500 in cash. I remembered reading it at the reception. That envelope had disappeared. Another cousin texted to ask if we had enjoyed the gift cards she and her husband bought. Gift cards? We had never received any. One by one, guests unintentionally revealed gifts we had never even known existed. Cash, gift cards, checks, everything valuable had vanished. Someone hadn't randomly taken boxes. They had opened every envelope, sorted every gift, kept what they wanted, returned what they didn't. It was organized with chilling precision. Ethan finally made his decision. He stood up, walked to the front door, and removed the spare key his parents had insisted on keeping years earlier. Then he called a locksmith. Every lock on our house was changed before sunset. He also contacted our bank and moved every important document into a secure safe. For the first time since our honeymoon ended, I felt safe inside my own home. That evening, Ethan looked at me and quietly apologized again. He admitted he should have believed me sooner. He had spent days trying to protect the image of the family he thought he knew. Instead, all he had done was give them more time. I told him something I truly believed. The people who stole from us aren't your family anymore. He nodded, and for the first time since our wedding, he agreed without hesitation. The next morning together, we walked into the police station carrying a thick binder filled with receipts, serial numbers, photographs, security footage, transaction records, and one tiny piece of paper that had started it all. That receipt no one thought was important. The officer flipped through the evidence for several minutes before looking up at us. Then he said something neither of us will ever forget. "This may be one of the easiest theft cases I've seen in years." At that moment, I knew Linda and Melissa's confidence was about to disappear forever. Walking into the police station was the moment everything changed. For days, Ethan's family had acted as if we were overreacting. They dismissed our questions. They blamed strangers. They blamed the stores. They even tried to convince us that family shouldn't keep score over wedding gifts. But evidence doesn't care about excuses. The detective assigned to our case organized everything into a timeline: the wedding, the honeymoon, the security footage, the store returns, the loyalty account, Melissa's social media photos, the missing cash gifts. Every piece fit perfectly. There were no gaps, no mystery, only one obvious conclusion. Someone had stolen our wedding gifts while we were away. Within 2 weeks, detectives interviewed Linda and Melissa separately. That turned out to be their biggest mistake, because liars rarely tell the same story twice. Linda claimed she had only stored the gifts temporarily. Melissa insisted they had divided everything because they assumed Ethan wouldn't mind sharing. Ethan's father claimed he knew nothing about any of it. Their stories contradicted each other almost immediately. The investigators didn't need dramatic confessions. They already had documents. They had transaction records. They had timestamps. And they had the loyalty account connected directly to Linda. A few days later, officers executed a search warrant. Some of our missing property was still inside Linda's house. The premium stand mixer sat on her kitchen counter. The espresso machine was still in its original box. Several unopened wedding gifts were stacked in a spare bedroom. Even my grandmother's handmade quilt was folded neatly inside a closet. The moment I held it again, I couldn't stop crying. Not because it was expensive, because I honestly believed I would never see it again. Other items had already been sold. Some had been exchanged for store credit. The cash envelopes were gone forever. But the financial records made it easy to calculate the losses. The court later ordered full restitution for everything that couldn't be recovered. Watching Linda try to explain her actions in court was surreal. She insisted she had only been helping the young couple. She claimed family property should stay within the family. The judge wasn't impressed. He reminded her that gifts legally belong to the people they are given to, not to relatives who decide they deserve them more. Melissa avoided looking at us throughout the hearing. Her confident smile had disappeared. So had every excuse. The consequences reached far beyond the courtroom. Several relatives who had believed Linda's version of events finally learned the truth. Friends who attended the wedding recognized the recovered gifts from the registry. Word spread quickly. The family members who once defended Linda quietly stopped answering her calls. Trust, once broken, never fully returned. As for Ethan, he made the hardest decision of his life. He cut all contact with the relatives who had planned the theft. Not because I demanded it, because he finally accepted that protecting people who repeatedly betray you only guarantees they'll do it again. We moved to another city a few months later. It wasn't about running away. It was about starting over. We built a home that belonged only to us. Every lock was new. Every boundary was clear. Every relationship in our lives was based on respect instead of obligation. Sometimes people ask whether I regret filing a police report against my husband's family. My answer is always the same: no. They weren't punished because they were family. They were punished because they chose to steal. Being related to someone doesn't give you permission to betray them. If anything, it makes that betrayal even worse. Looking back, I realize our greatest wedding gift wasn't the expensive appliances or the envelopes full of cash. It was discovering the truth before we spent years trusting people who had never respected us in the first place. Linda believed she had planned the perfect theft. Melissa believed no one would ever question family. They both forgot one simple thing: no matter how carefully you hide a lie, the truth only needs one forgotten receipt to find its way back. And in the end, the karma they tried to steal from us became the very thing that destroyed everything they thought they could keep. Thank you so much for watching Revenge Ruby. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. We share new stories filled with shocking betrayals, family drama, satisfying revenge, and the kind of karma that always finds its way. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What would you have done in this situation? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for being part of the Revenge Ruby community. We'll see you in the next story.